Action Hour with John Lovie, a water, environmental, and community activist and writer. And today we're going to be talking about his personal obsession with sea level rise. Which honestly, I think anyone who's interested in environmental issues and climate change and lives in Washington State and also on Whidbey Island is on some level obsessed with sea level rise because it's impacting us now and will be continuing to impact us in the future. I'm very curious, what are the state level kind of, coalitions and boards that you're on currently?
At the state level, there's really just one at the moment, which is a thing called the Habitat Strategic Initiative Advisory Team. There have been others, but just that one at the moment, which is basically looking at where to spend, as long as it's there, EPA National Estuary Program funding, on Puget Sound recovery. Mm-hmm. And they're looking at several different areas there, but the one that I'm most involved in is healthy shorelines. And there's no talking about healthy shorelines without talking about sea level rise.
Yes, I know my colleague and my boss, Marnie Jackson, is also on that same team with you and is also very interested in sea level rise. Yeah. Also wetlands is the other one that she's very interested in. But yeah, so what, based on, research you've done and rooms you've been in, what is the current state of sea level rise in Washington State?
Well, in overall, the sea level is rising, and that's happening for a number of reasons. One is, melting glaciers in Greenland and Antarctica, but also that the ocean is just continuing to absorb heat. Mm-hmm. And that's baked in, a bit of a pun there, but even if we stopped pumping out carbon dioxide today, that would increase for a while, both because of the carbon dioxide that's in there, that's in the atmosphere already, and just the inertia that's built into the system. So sea level is going to continue rising. Over Washington State, it varies some because there are parts of the state that are still rising. The land is still rising, is rebounding still from the last glaciation that ended 10,000 years ago or so, when there was about a mile of ice on top of it. So it's still bouncing back up. But in the Puget Sound, most of the Puget Sound is about the same, and it's mostly we're looking at about a foot by 2050. Actually, we're looking, the moderate projections are for more like 6 inches.
Yes.
But the line has been following the high projections so far, and there's no indication at all from anything that's happening at a national or global level that we're going to move off that high trajectory. So absent major changes in what we're doing, we can expect that to continue, and we can expect something like a foot by 2050. And on top of that, we can expect increasing storm intensities. So
a foot by 2050?
Yeah.
How does this relate to, because I attended Dr. Ian Miller's presentation that he gave on sea level rise for the Department of Ecology. And I'm looking at my notes right now as it relates to the West Coast flood risk, because he said it only takes a little over 2 inches of sea level rise to increase the potential for extreme hazard events like coastal flooding on the West Coast. So 2 inches versus a foot.
Yeah.
I mean, and 2050 is not that far away.
It's really not. It's really not. So, it's probably almost a little better to kind of illustrate this with a bit of a story. So this is my second go round on the Habitat Strategic Initiative Advisory Team. The first time I was serving on there from about 2018 to 2020. And one of the projects that we looked at was exactly that project from Ian Miller. Mm-hmm. And I fought pretty hard to get that funded because I thought it was important. And what it was a parcel scale assessment of exposure and vulnerability to sea level rise for the whole of the Puget Sound. So literally every single parcel in the Puget Sound, they assessed what the risk was, both the exposure and ultimately the vulnerability to sea level rise. And I was actually so interested in it that, because no good deed goes unpunished, I was actually asked to be an advisor on that team. So I went to a bunch of meetings with Ian and his colleagues. Cool. And it was a great report. And, it predicted what the impacts of that sea level rise will be by 2050, what the impacts on the communities will be, which houses will be flooded, and so on and so forth. And then in December of 2022, shortly after that report came out, we had an interesting event here. We had a storm surge on top of a king tide. So that was a deep low pressure area from a depression that was drifting over Whidbey Island at the same time as a king tide, which is, an unusually high king tide that we get fairly often in the winter.
Yeah.
And those coincided. It was no wind. It was basically calm. It was the eye of the storm pretty much. But that combination raised the sea level an extra couple of feet. And we wound up with flooding that around the island that pretty much exactly matched Ian Miller's team's prediction for 2050 from sea level rise alone.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was really pretty amazing how well it validated the model. I mean, beach to beach, really, lot to lot. There were places where people were being rescued from their homes by the fire department on paddle boards that had never flooded in the history of the place. And we can expect to see a lot more of that, unfortunately, by 2050 with pretty much every king tide. So, yeah, it's serious, and it has consequences for what people are trying to do about it and a whole bunch of other things. So that's what we're looking at. And on top of that, of course, we do have an increased risk of storms, and we do have an increased risk of those being more intense because of global warming. And these are unfortunately not independent variables. The probability of getting a low pressure area and a storm and a king tide all at the same time is much, much higher in the winter months. So those risks are to some extent additive. So that is and should be a concern.
I am curious about, so based on your being, a part of this study, this really comprehensive study, and look at the future of sea level rise in the Puget Sound region, how at risk is Island County compared to other places in the state? And where are we at greatest risk according to the predictions, like Ian Miller's models and the kind of 2022 example of what that would look like?
Island County overall is a pretty high risk.
Yeah.
One of the work products from that study was a map of the sound with an indication there. They highlighted in yellow the parcels that were in the top 10% of risk for sea level rise, for inundation because of sea level rise. And 50% of that top 10% are in Island County.
Wow.
We have really just tremendous exposure. And we have several beaches in Island County that, on top of that, also have very high exposure to waves and wind. West Beach being an obvious one, but also the one near me, Eustace Bay. So the answer is, yeah, we're at pretty high risk. And of course, we have a lot of development in those areas, what we call historic beachfront communities. And we've seen flooding there. There's actually some that maybe we didn't see in 2022 that we might see more of with sea level rise, with this becoming a more regular phenomenon, because we tend to look at sea level rise as being the water rising in the salt water and then kind of coming over the top of dikes and seawalls and so on and flooding that way. But the other thing that happens is what's called emergent groundwater, because in our conversation about drinking water, we described our drinking water aquifer as being effectively a freshwater lens floating on top of salt water. But what happens as sea level rises, so that saltwater layer rises and the freshwater lens on top of it rises. And the more we get when we have a storm surge is we get what's called emergent groundwater. So the water actually starts coming up out of the ground. And we saw that to a limited extent in 2022, but you'll see it today in places like Miami, where, on a sunny day at high tide, you can get your ankles wet crossing the street. And that's emergent groundwater. And that's extremely porous land down there. It's limestone with holes all over it. But we can expect to see similar things here in some of our low-lying communities, even that are a little ways inland. At Marin City, down in California, a quarter of a mile, half a mile inland from San Francisco Bay, is having exactly that problem. They're seeing emergent groundwater as their particular manifestation of sea level rise.
Wow. Okay. That's something I hadn't really considered, but that makes sense. What are the factors that are considered to assess vulnerability to sea level rise? Like, what are all of the factors that are considered to kind of get, I don't know, like a number that makes you more or less vulnerable?
Yeah. Good question. The number one is exposure. Mm-hmm. So that's a function of, basically elevation, how high above the ground it is. And looking strictly at sea level rise, not considering storms, that's mostly a function of elevation. There's a good storm model out there as well called Cosmos. If I was feeling smarter, I'd remember what the initials were, but that models wave heights and vulnerability to those things too. But on sea level rise, it's exposure, first of all, and then sensitivity. Mm-hmm. That's, how close the parcel is to the shoreline, how high it is, and so on. And then finally, adaptive capacity. And adaptive capacity is how quickly, how possible is it to do something about it, to like raise the height of the building or set it back or something like that. Mm-hmm. And you can also factor in a social vulnerability as well. Yeah. The problem with all of these measures were really designed to, at the parcel scale, to cover not just real property, but also habitat, mm-hmm. and also common infrastructure like boat ramps, beaches, parks, and stuff like water lines and telephone lines and power and stuff like that. The problem was that when that group came to do the study, the only sound-wide parcel scale database they could find was for property values, real estate, because right. that's the thing we tax.
That's the thing we tax. That's the thing we value. Yeah. Well, you and I mentioned this, or it leads into my next question, which is what data do we currently have for these assessments and where do we fall short in terms of data? And I guess there is like no sound-wide assessment of habitat, for example.
No, and they're going to do another round of this study where they're hoping to try to fill in some of those gaps. But yeah, that was a bit of a showstopper and a bit of a blow, was finding out that really the only good data was on real estate. We don't even have good data on in the ground infrastructure, for example, mm-hmm. Or even on things like roads. I mean, mm-hmm. We know they're there, but we don't have tremendously good elevation data on stuff like that. And and boat ramps and beaches and so on and so forth. So it's really hard to protect and look after things that you really can't measure. So that's a serious problem. But these are really designed to measure all of those things. And if you look at something like adaptive capacity for real estate, that is, can you move the property further back or to higher ground? Mm-hmm. And on some beachfront communities, the answer to that is a flat no. There's nowhere to move. So you might be able to raise them, and that's mm-hmm. not always easy or cheap to do. Mm-hmm. But in terms of habitat, where you have a beach, can that beach recede? Mm-hmm. And if it has, a concrete bulkhead on it, the answer is no, it's not going anywhere. You're just going to lose it, and it's not going to be able to walk itself back like it would have done, before development. And the same is true of things like salt marshes. Can they recede back? Is there room for them to go? And can they move fast enough to react in time to the increase in sea level? So there are huge questions around the resilience of our natural environment. Mm-hmm. and natural habitat to sea level rise that we're having trouble answering at this point because the data's not there. And that's equally true of communal infrastructure.
Mm. Yeah, I think, we do know that in Island County, we have at about 3 miles of armored shoreline. and that, between 2016 and 2023, I think 95% of new bulkheads or, bulkhead revisions that were done were unpermitted, and that people are armoring their properties, whether or not the county is permitting them to do so, while other communities have been lobbying to have bulkheads put in different areas for a really long time and being denied because of the nature of the request and how it would impact both the habitat and the community around them, but I'm wondering if you could speak to when is a bulkhead effective? What does it do? And why isn't it effective against sea level rise? Because as far as I understand, it's an erosion tool. It's not actually going to stop your house from flooding at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that's fundamentally correct. We've had both in the last 10 years. Both erosion events and sea level rise events. We had that storm surge, which modeled sea level rise very well. We've had both of those here on our local beach. And in 2017, I think it was, in December again, we had a major storm. So water coming over the top of the seawall at the time and eroding it at the bottom. So a lot of repairs were done immediately following that. And we also had the flooding event, which had no waves associated with it at all, and where the seawall basically didn't do much because the water just came over the top of the lower parts of it. It came around the end of it. Mm-hmm. Part of our community that's down at the far end, that's exposed on the backside to Deer Lagoon, flooded anyway. Mm-hmm. The water just came right around the back and flooded it there. And in, the scenario that we're looking at for 2050, we're going to see emergent groundwater as a major problem anyway. So, right, it's an erosion tool. Mm-hmm. And I was actually at a presentation by Island County yesterday where they went over that study, and 95% of the bulkheads that had gone in were non-permitted, which is telling you basically that the whole permitting process doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And it's not a popular thing, but I go a stage further to say that the whole offshore armoring industry that sprung up over the past 10 years, and there's great people working things like the Shore Friendly program, and for all the contractors that are out there trying to do this stuff, the low-hanging fruit has already been picked. We're at a point where almost every accretion beach, and I'll spin back and define that in a second, already has a bulkhead in front of it. There's hardly any gaps left, and those are being filled. There's zero respect for the permitting process. People just ignore it and do it anyway. So the answer to that problem is going to be a lot more complex than fighting over bulkheads, which is why I just tend not even to go there anymore. Mm-hmm. It's scary. And, what's happened on this beach is that we used to be able to walk on it. You can't anymore because those bulkheads have driven the beach away. The wave energy hits them and just washes them back. So they're still going in because we're offering people no alternative. We mm-hmm. have no sound-wide plan for mm-hmm. sea level rise adaptation. Mm-hmm. We're not offering these people any answers or any solutions. Mm-hmm. We just have a bunch of people saying you can't put a bulkhead in. And the result of that is they put one in anyway, and they just don't ask. Mm-hmm. So it ain't working. There's books on this. I've read many of them. There's a great book by a lady called Elizabeth Rush. Right after I left New Jersey 12 years ago. Mm-hmm. I know you know it well. Superstorm Sandy came through.
Yes, I was there for Superstorm Sandy.
You were there for it?
Oh, yeah.
And, the chapters on that in Liz Rush's book are great. She talks about places I knew well in New Jersey, like Sayreville and South Amboy, where Chris Christie's Blue Acres program came in and bought out those properties, condemned them, and they put, some park in there or something that's it doesn't matter if it gets flooded. And they did something similar up in, I think, Oak Bay on Staten Island. Mm-hmm. But down the shore, where the expensive houses are, they got the Army Corps to come in and pump in even more sand and build these humongous dunes so that people mm-hmm. would be, quote unquote, protected for a while. Terrible iniquities come out of this if we just let nature and people take their course. And that's the thing I think that upsets me most about this issue, is that if you look at where it's going, and where it's gone in other states, it just doesn't look good. Nobody yet has done a really good job of this. Of this kind of adaptation. Another really great book on the topic is Rosanna Jha, who's the coastal environmental reporter for the LA Times, just does fantastic work. And she wrote a book called California Against the Sea. And it's just extremely sobering reading. I mean, again, nobody's really figured out how to do this. And it's just heartbreaking, the communities that are being destroyed by it and no kind of coordinated response. And unfortunately, we're seeing the same here. We don't have a sound-wide program. And in Washington, it's made even more complicated by this private ownership of tidelands, which is just a huge extra level of complication.
So can you talk about the private ownership of tidelands, what the public owns? Like, what does the public own? What does private ownership look like? And then can you define you cited a beach type before and then said you would come back to it.
Yes. Accretion beach.
Yeah.
So our whole landscape around the coast of Whidbey Island is defined by bluffs and beaches, basically. That's most of what we have. And what's happening continuously is that it's eroding. I mean, Whidbey Island is slowly dissolving into the sea, and there's not a whole lot we can do about that. And what happens is that the bluffs erode. If you walk, for instance, Double Bluff Beach, almost every time I walk down there, I'll see a new slide because it's being hit with storms coming up from the south, and it erodes. And the sand from that erosion process drifts along. In most areas on the island, there's a definite direction to that drift. It'll drift along the coast, and then it'll be deposited on a beach, and usually somewhere where there's water flowing out. And that might be that subsurface flow, or it might be a surface flow. But, as that fresh water comes out and collides with that drift, you'll see the sand drop out, and you'll get beach formation. And that's how all our beaches were formed and maintained. And so you have eroding bluffs, and then you have beaches where the sand accretes. And those accretion beaches are very valuable habitat. I mean, birds nest on them, lay eggs on them, fish spawn on them. There's fish eggs in there. There's all kinds of life that uses those beaches for spawning and so on. And then you put a seawall behind there. And what happens is normally the waves hit that beach, they'll run up, lose energy as they're going up, and then more debris will drop out of there. And you'll wind up, the waves will actually transport more material in, and you'll build up a dune there, and you'll build it up a little higher. As soon as you put
you're talking about a natural dune, right? That's like
Yeah, right. So, and you'll see those in some places still on the island, where we have a natural accretion beach. The one that was it? Parego's Lagoon, just north of Eby's Landing. That's still, there's still some natural accretion going on there from the erosion of those bluffs. And other places around the island. Over on the peninsula, a huge one, Dungeness Spit, for example, where the Dungeness River comes out and stops that drift, and then you wind up with this huge sand spit. Have the same thing going on here on a smaller scale in many places. But as soon as you put a seawall there, that water can't run up and deposit sand because there's a house and a road there, and there's a seawall, and it just bounces off the seawall. And as it goes back out, taking the energy with it, it takes sand with it as well. So you just basically scour the beach. And unfortunately, those accretion beaches are exactly where people want to build houses and go play in the sand and paddle in the water and all the rest of it. So you have that going on. And then on top of it, you have this phenomenon of private ownership where the state back in the 1800s sold off tidelands, not so that people could yell at people for walking across their beach, but so they could cultivate oysters. A lot of the places where you'd want to do that, you wouldn't want to eat them because there's septic systems on that beach now as well. But people misinterpret that, and they think they own the beach. And just because you own it doesn't mean you can stop people walking across it any more than, because you own a piece of property, you can stop people flying a plane over it. And there's a thing called the public trust doctrine that states that basically anything below the tide line is public property, which means if I can paddle my kayak across it at low tide, at high tide, I can walk on it at low tide.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody's ever taken that to the courts and tested it. And they probably should. But it just makes it much more complicated to do anything collectively about this kind of problem. California and Oregon both have public beaches. The tidelines are owned by the public, and that's that. And blessed Oregon, even in Cannon Beach, there's even a brewery called Public Coast Brewery. Celebrate that fact.
That's amazing. Well, and it makes me wonder, so like public trust doctrine, I mean, because if we talk about strategies for moving forward, right, you're like, there isn't a sound-wide strategy at the moment to deal with sea level rise, to deal with storm severity, to deal with the needs of climate resiliency. I know that the Department of Ecology is going through a rulemaking process for the Shoreline Management Act to include rules for storm severity and climate resiliency in particular, as well as sea level rise. But the Would Be Environmental Action Network has been involved in an informal ENGO coalition around that rulemaking, trying to help influence the language that goes into that rulemaking. But that doesn't really account for what we're talking about, which is the problem of private land ownership when it comes to the beaches, as we prepare for at least an additional foot of water in 25 years. I mean, it's not 100 years from now. It's 25 years from now. It's very, very close. It's not even, it's within our lifetime. Like if you live into your 90s, which I assume you will, you'll be around for 2050. and it's, and so I'm wondering what you think needs to happen next for us as a county, but also as a state, to prepare for what is going to happen based on projections, based on the studies that, scientists like Ian Miller and his team have done and will continue to do. Where do we need to head to actually be prepared for this in a way that serves our communities and is being realistic about what is already occurring?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing; it is already occurring. I mean, we've already effectively lost so many of the accretion beaches. We've lost. People have lost faith in the permitting process and in government at large on this issue because they see them broadly as being not helpful. So there's a huge breakdown in trust between these communities and the regulatory authorities right now that's going to be hard to repair. But and like I said, it would be nice if we could point to examples of where this is happening well, but there aren't too many. And so many complicating factors. And a huge part of this is really down to just the way that people function. We have a hard time as humans in dealing with long-term threats. And we have a much easier time dealing with short-term threats, particularly things that can be spun as limitations on our freedom. So, we have a hard time wrapping around our heads around the fact that our property is going to be flooding in 20 years. That we can't get our heads around, but we can totally be outraged that we're not allowed to put a bulkhead in right now. And that's human nature, and it's not going to change. So the conversation that we need to have, in my mind, is a conversation about what we want this island and these beaches to look like in 2050. And, what they will look like if we don't change something, which is they're going to look like West Beach, which is basically concrete rubble in large areas at this point. So what do we want it to look like? And how do we get there from here? And the big one is, who's going to pay for it? And until we start asking those questions, we're reorganizing deck chairs on the Titanic, quite honestly. We're just not dealing with the roots of the problem. As long as there are houses on the beach, there will be bulkheads and there will effectively be no beach. We're going to wind up with just wharves where we ought to have accretion beaches.
Well, what I have said for probably at least the last year, like the only strategy that I can think of is for there to be a state buyback program for people who own shoreline property to incentivize them to sell and for the people and the public to own the land around the shores and to demolish the homes there for there to not be development where development will not be sustainable for the next 25 to 30 years or the next 100 years, whatever, whatever marker you want to put on it, but at least by 2050, right? If your house is going to be inundated with flooding by 2050, it would make sense now to find a way to remove yourself from that property and for it to have long-term management as habitat and the ecosystem that it would be without humans there. I mean, we were talking about Superstorm Sandy, and you were talking about the beaches of New Jersey, where I'm from. And I studied with an oceanographer in college who specifically studied sand dunes. And he had been taking pictures of sand dunes since the 1970s and watching the natural erosion process of the beaches. And I learned about how much, like, the beaches that you see in New Jersey are largely formed with sand dredged from the middle of the ocean and dumped onto the beaches to create recreational areas, completely eroding the natural sand dune process and making people think that they could build closer than they actually should be building their homes. That it creates this false sense of relationship without recognizing that the land was manipulated in the first place. And, I know that, like, there are also certain places in Whidbey Island where the beaches that exist were actually dynamited out and would have been a bluff. There would have been no beach there to begin with. And yet people have built their homes in and around those areas, without really, I guess, having a full understanding of the natural processes that would be existing there without them, Yeah. And so I do think it is in human nature also to believe that we can manipulate and shape the land to do our bidding. And I think what is true and what climate change is showing us is that is absolutely not the case. And it's happening at a rate faster than ever before. Is that the kickback from the planet being like, absolutely not.
Yeah. Folks who are listening to this probably may get the idea that Amanda and I just really enjoyed chatting about this stuff, and that's pretty correct.
Yes, that is true. We do enjoy chatting stuff, and as it pertains to Island County and as it pertains to the state and what we can do about this particular issue, as you said, it's huge. It's a huge issue, and it goes against human nature to have to say we can't live here anymore.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I don't want to downplay that side of it. I mean, it's easy to come up with these ideas of what we ought to do, but we can only move at the speed of consent, and we can only move at the speed that people can really get their heads around this stuff. Yeah. And it is incredibly hard. But yeah, we need, you speak of a buyback program, just to take it back there for a second. Yeah. King County, to some extent, is doing that. I mean, they're buying properties on Vashon Island that become vacant and basically demolishing them and letting that beach go back to its natural state. But they have tax income from Amazon and Costco and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And we don't have that here. What we have is the executives from Amazon and Costco owning properties on the beach, and Island County really needs the property taxes from those properties to pay for our basic services like our fire and our police and our schools. Mm-hmm. So the county doesn't have an incentive to try to limit development right now. I mean, the way that budgets are run, there's no incentive to do that. And the same to an extent is true at the state level. We won't bring in any kind of progressive tax system that could pay for this stuff. And, we are, and I'm involved in it through this Habitat Strategic Initiative, still to a certain extent kidding ourselves that we can grant fund our way out of this problem while continuing to do business as usual. And we kind of know that that's really not the case. We're going to have to change the way that we do things on some kind of fundamental level. But hey, that's true of climate change. That's true of everything that we're doing. And this is just one example of where it's really starting to hit home today. And we're seeing it, in my case, right down the street from me, where we're seeing these things on a collision course between what people down there want and expect and what we're willing and able to do as a county and as a state, as a society, fundamentally about it, because, we're the ones who vote for those taxes or not. So we're in a tough place. as a society. And it's hard to say the county should do this or the state should do that when, as a population, we're just not there yet. So I think increasing the dialogue around these issues and trying to get more people involved in the conversation, taking the risk of going out to the people who are living in these communities, taking the risk of getting yelled at, is just something that we need to do to really start having the conversations that can lead to a communal solution to this problem.
So what I'm hearing from you, because one of my questions was, where do we go from here? And what I'm hearing is that we need to be having more conversations, and that as a community, with the general public and with the people who are being directly affected by sea level rise because their homes are on the water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what we're dealing with is a lack of political will, and political will comes from the ground up. I mean, we have to build political support in the community for something like this. Mm-hmm. And one of the paradoxes, and I occasionally write about this on Whitby Island, is that we are so strong in community. I mean, I'm a member of, you and I are in community together in various areas, and then, I'm in bicycle communities. I've been in a choir. I mean, the list goes on. I have so many friends in so many different areas, the farming community. Mm-hmm. And these communities are so strong and so powerful and so cohesive. When we start dealing with these things, it evaporates. The community's not there. We're dealing partly because we're dealing with a lot of out of towners, a lot of people who have second homes in these areas. Mm-hmm. But people just withdraw and become insular and defensive. And it's like, could we do better here on Whitby Island of taking our community spirit and bringing that to some of these more difficult issues? And perhaps coming to some solutions and being perhaps a beacon for some other parts of the country that are going through the same thing, which is pretty much heavy shoreline. Yeah. Or am I dreaming? I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking that we need to try.
I think that's a really noble and worthy pursuit, is to bring community spirit around these issues. And I also, every time, there isn't a model to look to, I think that makes us, Whidbey and Camano Islands, the potential pilot for the way things should be, or could be, or we can be the community that creates the best practices around some of these issues. And that's what I'm kind of hoping as it relates to shorelines, especially because, from a state advocacy standpoint, we are a county that has an incredible amount of shoreline. Us and San Juan County are two of the most at risk and have are dealing with this particular problem as islands. And I think that, that makes us very powerful voices on a state level, because we are communities that are currently and will continue to be hugely impacted. And so I think about that in terms of my advocacy, and how I can best serve our community as an advocate as it relates to shoreline issues, because I'm like, well, this is one of those things. This is one of the things that's unique to us. It's one of the things that is, currently in play, and it's extremely complicated. Like you said, it's not easy to parse out the solutions. I mean, my state buyback program, I still stand by. I still think that's, I think, like finding ways to get people out of locations that are going to be inundated, I think is, the long-term strategy that I would like to support, rather than people putting their houses on stilts. But, but I guess it's dependent on the location. Like each individual property is different. Each individual part of the beach is different. But I think that I'm interested in solutions that have the greatest outcome for the most number of people and for our habitat, because I think one of the things about Whidbey and Camano Islands is we have some of the most unique shoreline habitats, very special. When I was talking with Linda Rhodes on this podcast about the shoreline ecosystems, she was saying, like, we're special in terms of the types of shorelines we have and the kinds of habitat they support, and so it would be really, I think, detrimental to our ecosystems and also to our non-human communities to destroy those in an attempt to save our homes for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, it's a real concern that, if we stay on the current course of basically just, proliferating unpermitted armor, and sea level rise in collision with each other, the big loser is going to be the habitat. If we don't plan for its survival and recovery, then it's not really going to have a future, and that would be really sad. So that's one of my big concerns, and one of the reasons I think that we do need a plan. And but I tell you, this buyback thing's tough for reasons that are unrelated, but nonetheless useful. I wound up taking a look at property values in our community of those properties on the beach and those up here on the up the hill, as they say. And our average assessed value up here is somewhere around 500,000, 600,000. Mm-hmm. Down on the beach, it's about $1.5 million. It's 1.6. It's like 3 times. Mm-hmm. And, you get immediate pushback. Well, why should we pay for, so it's.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's legitimate to be like, why should we be paying for this? And my argument is we're going to be paying for it anyway. If at the end of the day, it is the taxpayer that will pay for this anyway. If a derelict structure is left in the ocean, it's going to be the county that's going to have to pull it out. And there won't be beach. How much money are we going to have to pay to rehabilitate the habitat that's lost in this process? And if you don't think habitat is necessary for our survival, that is not the case. It's also
totally. I hear every one of these things, and it's
not incidental. It's essential. So
and there's no, I hear everything you're saying, and I totally agree.
It would be a very expensive program. To your point, that program.
How do we build political will for that in a society that increasingly is valuing individual rights over community? It's
well, that is a good. I mean, you have to believe in community first, I think, is the thing, and then you have to see the people in the circumstance as members of your community. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I do think that is that's the hurdle, and that's a really big one. And I'm also open to alternative theories and alternative. But that's the only one that I could think of that achieves what is necessary.
Yeah, I mean, fiscally or whatever, it's on some level, it's where we need to get to. But it's managed retreat, as it's called. Yep. Still a toxic phrase. You're reading. Yeah,
it's very complicated, that phrase.
There's a community in California called Imperial Beach. It's south of San Diego, almost on the border with Mexico. And the mayor of that community actually uttered those words and was out of office in a heartbeat. I mean, it's we are not there as a society. That it's not part of the language. We are going to rebuild. Look at the Palisades wildfires. I mean, we're going to put stuff back exactly how it was. And by the way, we're going to waive all the environmental regulations while we're at it, so you can rebuild quicker. I mean, so what are we doing here, people? It's
well. Do you think that climate relocation is a better phrasing to manage retreat? Do you think there are alternative ways we could describe this process do you think it's the word retreat that people get really upset about? Do you think it's just the concept of having to move at all?
I think it's the concept. One of the communities that worked sort of when they did this in managed retreat, and Liz Rush's book covers several examples of where it went really badly. Trailer parks in California, St. Charles Island, majority Black community down in Louisiana. Horrible way it was handled. Community was spread everywhere. Oak Bay on Staten Island, they relocated the community, but they kept them together. So they moved that whole community inland, but they had the same neighbors and the same sense of community maintained. And that's a huge thing with some of these beach communities here. So much of that's been lost already because so many are now second homes and they're out-of-towners who don't know the rules of the community, don't have friends there, didn't grow up there, haven't known each other since they were wearing diapers, like so many of the people who are there today. And to a large extent, they're mourning the loss of all of that as well. Mm-hmm. So there's just a lot of layers to this. And on a personal level, it's just excruciatingly difficult for these people. I can't even talk to my neighbors on the beach about this stuff. They just change the subjects and look off into the distance. They can't handle it. And it's we have a long way to go, just so far to go on this stuff. And the sociological human side of this is an enormous dimension of it that can't be neglected. We can't, policy work our way through this.
Actually, I think it is the hurdle that needs to be overcome before a policy can even be addressed. Mm-hmm. Is the psychological and emotional reality of what it would mean to have to move your house or leave.
Yep.
And what that means for some people, and I don't think of shoreline owners as just like rich people with third homes, although sometimes that's the case. I think about the people who worked all their lives to live on the beach. Mm-hmm. And they were like, that was their reward for whatever years of work or whatever it is. And they were able to finally get their beachfront house, and they can wake up in the morning and look at the water. Who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want to wake up and look at the water? I do, I do. I mean, that's why I'm here. I'm just a quarter of a mile and 60 feet uphill, but that's me. Right. Not everybody knew what I knew when I moved here. And it's well, I've always lived at the top of the hill, because I also come from New Jersey, right outside of Manhattan, and lower Manhattan's going to be underwater. Right. Sure. Like when Superstorm Sandy happened, I had friends who lived in buildings who could not leave. Because the whole neighborhood was underwater. Yeah. So, and so I'm like, I'm always looking to live at the top of a hill. That's me. Mm-hmm. But I also understand the dream. I also understand the love, right? Like, people live in places they shouldn't live because they love it.
Yeah.
But what does that love look like? Right. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to love a thing? Sometimes loving a thing means letting it go.
Yeah. It really just does. It really does. And in more ways than one. And it's, But so much of what I try to do these days around these issues is promote things and ideas that do try to strengthen community and try to act on a broader community scale. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not too challenging to come up with technical solutions to some of these problems that would work. Mm-hmm. That's almost never the problem. The problem is almost always the people. And we can't do it without them. I mean, they got to be part of the conversation. And I just hear so many conversations around things like shoreline armoring, where the people on the beach are just not in the room. Mm-hmm. And it's not a solution if it doesn't involve the community whose problem it's trying to solve. I mean, it's mm-hmm. So we have to we need a whole level of dialogue that we're not having on these issues. And I wish I could look to examples of where it's working and where it's happened well. And there just aren't too many. I mean, the whole country's struggling. California, despite having a coastal commission, is still struggling everywhere where they're dealing with these issues on exactly how to handle it.
Yeah. A while ago, I thought about us hosting a conversation that was just all about grief, like the grief related to climate change and sea level rise. I mean, even if you don't own a home on the beach, right? Like, climate change is affecting all of us in ways, and is asking us to change in ways that we as human beings find difficult. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And also when it comes to development, right? It's like people want this concept of the residential family home on acres of land, if you live out here. Mm-hmm. Solution from an ecological standpoint is walkable cities and multifamily housing, the way you see in Europe. Yep. So it's not just shoreline people. It's not just the hard armoring. It's the way we live, like the realities of the world we live in versus the way that we have learned to live as a society.
Yeah, and there's so many layers to that. I mean, it's one of the experiences of coming here from another country is seeing some of this, at least in the beginning, through an outsider's eyes. But I mean, so many people came here as refugees from Europe because they couldn't own land.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, my ancestors, you know, were denied land in Scotland, and a lot of them wound up in Canada and Australia. Not so many came directly to the United States. But I mean, there's levies in Canada, there's levies in Australia. And because they were denied land because of you know, the enclosures and stuff and the Highland issues. And the people came here wanting that. And of course turned around and did the same thing to the Native Americans here and just took the land. But it's become baked in. I mean, people here just grew up watching Little House on the Prairie, you know, and they want a piece of that. It's in the psyche. And it's hard to dislodge that. But it has consequences. And it's, you know, the myth of the West, you know, the rugged individualism and the property rights over everything. It's hurting us really badly, but we don't see that. With everything from shorelines to drinking water. I mean, it's all part of the same story.
Yeah, it is. Any final words? Anything else you want to share with our listeners before we close out?
Yeah, I wish I could think of something cheerful here. We kind of need that. Well, I think, you know, I think the counter narrative has always been that, you know, that's the myth that's out there. The reality has always been that it's been as much about towns and cities and libraries and schools and the buildup of civil society. And we don't talk about that anywhere near enough, but it's there and it's really strong. And there's almost nowhere where it's stronger than right here on Whidbey Island. So I think we really can be a beacon, and we can really can show that through working together, we can overcome some of these problems. And I'm looking forward to working with you and all the other people on community with here to try to do just that.
Yes, for a statewide or a sound-wide plan to tackle sea level rise. I think that's the next step, right? Is to figure out how we can all come together as a community to address this issue. And that is positive. And I do think that we can be a beacon for other communities dealing with similar issues. And I'm looking forward to that as well. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for sharing your knowledge. And I look forward to talking to you again, hopefully about a public utility district, hopefully about our sound-wide plan that we're working on together. A lot of movement happening here. So stay tuned.
There's a lot going on. I just really thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope people listening have as much fun listening as we had recording it. So
absolutely. And for those of you who are interested in learning more, John has a Substack, which I read and I love. And it is johnlovie.substack.com. His blog is called Mostly Water, and I will also put that in the show notes for anyone who's interested in reading. So thank you, John. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Amanda. Talk to you soon.
Another man up in the pulpit in the state house. Head of the table with a black pen, scratching egos, talking too loud. Externalize every outcome, every warm gun, every profit. And kneeling down to the flashing numbers, the NASDAQ, the cold constructs. Running backwards to just keep moving, just keep moving, just keep moving. Unlearning every lesson that our mothers tried to teach us.
This podcast is a production of the Whidbey Environmental Action Network and is made possible by our generous donors. Produced, edited, and mixed by me, Amanda Bullis. Special thanks to Marianne and Steve for their years of service through action and for lending their voices to this podcast. To WEEN's Executive Director, Marnie Jackson, and our board for their leadership. Special thanks to Whidbey musician Nathaniel Talbot for letting us use his track Intuition from the album Animal, available on Bandcamp.
Every day on your paycheck, a volume of confidence against the idea of your body being put into your own hands. So please don't hold it, please don't hold it, please don't hold it back. Unleash the power, the straight logic of compassion. Stepping out of the shadow of a false man's allegory, slowly erasing that old violence from the story. Recoupling emotion, slow emotion to intelligence, granting the planters, healers, teachers, feelers a new relevance. What I need now ain't that old religion or the